When 4-year-old Emma suddenly collapsed in the emergency room, her mother, the wealthy and powerful Scarlett Thompson, demanded a better doctor. But instead of salvation, she was confronted by a woman she despised for one reason alone. Dr. Sophia Williams is used to prejudice. But on that day, more than her professional reputation was at stake: the life of a little girl. Seconds mattered. But when Sophia received the test results, her blood ran cold. It wasn't just a rare diagnosis. It was the signature of a killer who'd been hiding for decades. Who was the real threat? Why was this case repeating itself 20 years later? And most importantly, will they have time to uncover the terrible truth before it's too late? Listen on to find out what nightmare lurked behind the Thompsons' luxurious family life. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai's emergency room buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across Scarlett Thompson's tear-stained face. Her 4-year-old daughter, Emma, lay whimpering on the hospital bed, her strawberry blonde curls matted with sweat against the sterile white pillow. "I specifically requested a doctor 20 minutes ago," Scarlett snapped, her manicured fingers drumming against the bed rail. "Not a nurse. My daughter's fever is 103, and I won't have some auxiliary staff treating her." Sophia Williams maintained her professional composure, though her chest tightened at the familiar sting of assumption. After 15 years of medicine, the prejudice still cut deep. She glanced down at her white coat, the Dr. Williams, Chief of Emergency Medicine, embroidered clearly on the breast pocket. "Ma'am, I understand your concern. Do you?" Scarlett interrupted, her voice rising. "Because I'm not sure you do. I mean, look at you. How long have you even been working here? Where did you train? I demand to speak to your supervisor." The few patients in nearby beds turned to stare. A young resident passing by froze, his eyes widening in recognition of his chief. Sophia felt the weight of every gaze, the familiar battle between maintaining professional dignity and confronting blatant prejudice raging within her. "Breathe. You've been here before. This isn't about you. It's about the child." "Mrs. Thompson," Sophia began again, her voice steady but firm, "your daughter presents with symptoms consistent with bacterial meningitis. Every minute we delay treatment." "Oh, please," Scarlett scoffed, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my private physician. This is ridiculous. I knew we should have gone to Presbyterian. The standards here are clearly—" "Mommy," Emma's small voice cracked. "My neck really hurts." In that instant, everything changed. Emma's body stiffened, her eyes rolling back as seizures took hold. Sophia sprang into action, her commands sharp and precise. "Code Blue. I need a crash cart and 0.2 milligrams of lorazepam, stat." The ER erupted into controlled chaos. Scarlett stumbled backward, her phone clattering to the floor as she watched Sophia and her team work with practiced efficiency. Through her tears, she caught glimpses of the doctor's swift, confident movements, the respect in the staff's eyes as they followed her orders. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Emma's seizures subsided. As the immediate crisis stabilized, Sophia stepped back, making rapid notes in the chart while issuing follow-up orders. "Dr. Williams," a nurse called out, holding up a phone. "Dr. Harrison from Presbyterian is on the line. He says he's Mrs. Thompson's private physician." Sophia took the phone, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Harrison?" "Yes, this is Sophia Williams, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Mount Sinai." She paused, listening. "Actually, Tom, I remember you from Hopkins. You were 2 years behind me in residency." The color drained from Scarlett's face as she watched Sophia discuss her daughter's case with evident expertise, referencing recent studies and suggesting treatment protocols that her private physician readily agreed with. When Sophia hung up, she turned back to Scarlett, who stood frozen, shame and fear warring on her face. "Mrs. Thompson, I consulted with Dr. Harrison, and he agrees with my diagnosis and treatment plan. Now, would you like to discuss your daughter's care, or would you prefer to continue questioning my qualifications?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Scarlett opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Williams?" A nurse appeared, holding a tablet. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." We just got Emma's preliminary blood work back, and she hesitated, glancing between Sophia and Scarlett. Sophia took the tablet, her professional mask slipping for just a moment as she read the results. She looked up at Scarlett, her expression now filled with a complex mix of emotions. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to talk. These results, they show something I've only seen once before in my career. And it was in a patient who..." Sophia paused, her voice catching slightly. "Who was your husband's first wife?" The tablet trembled slightly in Sophia's hands as Scarlett's face went from confusion to shock to horror, the implications of this revelation slowly sinking in. Sometimes prejudice wasn't the only poison running through family trees. Sophia's office on the 6th floor offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, but she barely noticed the golden sunset. Her fingers traced the edge of Emma Thompson's medical file, mind racing through the implications of what she'd discovered. Of all the hospitals in New York, they had to walk into mine. 20 years earlier, Alexandra Martinez Thompson had died under similar circumstances. Now her stepdaughter showed identical symptoms. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Scarlett stood in the doorway, her earlier arrogance replaced by visible exhaustion. Her designer outfit was wrinkled, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. "Dr. Williams, Scarlett's voice cracked. "I owe you an apology." Sophia gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Mrs. Thompson. We have a lot to discuss. Please call me Scarlett." She sank into the chair, hands fidgeting with her wedding ring. "I behaved horribly earlier. It's just, when Emma started seizing, Fear makes people react in different ways," Sophia interrupted, her tone professional but distant. "However, that's not why I called you here. Tell her everything? Or protect her from the truth?" Scarlett leaned forward. "What did you mean about James's first wife?" "I hardly knew anything about Alexandra except that she died young from some rare condition." Sophia pulled out an old medical journal, opening to a bookmark page. "I was a resident when Alexandra's case was published. Her symptoms were unique, a genetic mutation we'd never seen before. The same mutation Emma's blood work shows." The color drained from Scarlett's face. "But that's impossible. Emma isn't biologically related to Alexandra." "Exactly." Sophia's voice was quiet but firm. "Which is why I need to ask you some difficult questions about your husband." The conversation that followed was brutal in its intensity. With each revelation, each connecting dot, Scarlett's perfectly constructed world began to crumble. James would never. Scarlett's voice trailed off as memories surfaced. Unexplained business trips, mysterious phone calls, his obsession with certain medications. "Oh God!" Sophia watched the realization dawn on Scarlett's face, remembering her own battles with painful truths. Her mind drifted to that scholarship interview 25 years ago, when the dean had smiled condescendingly and suggested nursing might be more suitable for someone like her. "Dr. Williams?" Scarlett's voice pulled her back. "Why are you helping us like this? After how I treated you?" Sophia stood, walking to the window. "Because 20 years ago, I made a promise to a dying woman. Alexandra was my patient too, though I was just a resident then. She made me promise to find out the truth. And did you?" "I tried, but the hospital board shut down my investigation. Your husband's family has considerable influence here." Sophia turned back to face Scarlett. "But now, with Emma's case, we have proof." Scarlett's phone buzzed, a text from James saying he was on his way. Her hands shook as she showed it to Sophia. "What do we do?" Before Sophia could respond, her office door burst open. Dr. Marcus Chun, the hospital's legal counsel, strode in with 2 security guards. "Dr. Williams, you're suspended effective immediately. The board is convening an emergency session regarding your unauthorized investigation into the Thompson cases." "You can't do this," Sophia protested. "I'm chief of emergency." "Was chief of emergency," Marcus corrected. "The board has evidence that you've been pursuing a personal vendetta against the Thompson family for years. Security will escort you out." As the guards approached, Sophia locked eyes with Scarlett, whose expression had transformed from despair to something else, determination. "Actually," Scarlett stood, her voice steady, "Dr. Williams isn't going anywhere. Because I'm about to tell you something about my husband that will make this hospital's board wish they'd listened to her 20 years ago. She pulled out her phone, playing a voice recording that made Marcus Chen's face go pale. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon isn't prejudice or power. It's a desperate mother with nothing left to lose. The hospital boardroom felt like a pressure cooker, thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Sophia sat rigidly in her chair, watching James Thompson pace before the floor-to-ceiling windows, his expensive suit unable to mask his growing agitation. "This is absurd," James sputtered, running his hands through his silver-streaked hair. "You're actually giving credence to these ridiculous allegations?" Scarlett's voice recording played again through the speakers, filling the room with James's own damning words about experimental treatments and necessary sacrifices. How many others? Sophia wondered, her stomach churning. How many lives destroyed by this man's obsession? "Mr. Thompson," Board Chairman Richardson cleared his throat, "these accusations are serious. Dr. Williams has presented compelling evidence." "Evidence?" James sneered, spinning to face Sophia. "You mean the ravings of a woman who's been trying to destroy my reputation for decades? Let's be honest about what this really is: reverse racism, plain and simple." The room fell silent. Sophia felt the familiar burn of rage rising in her throat. But before she could respond, Scarlett stood up. "Don't you dare," she hissed at her husband. "Don't you dare try to make this about race when our daughter is fighting for her life because of what you did." James's face darkened. "Scarlett, sit down. You're emotional." "I'm emotional." She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You experimented on your own child, just like you did with Alexandra." In the tense silence that followed, Sophia's mind raced back to that night 20 years ago. Alexandra's last words echoed in her memory. "Promise me you'll expose him, Sophia. Promise me they'll know the truth." "Dr. Williams," Chairman Richardson's voice cut through her thoughts. "You've been unusually quiet. Would you care to address Mr. Thompson's accusations?" Sophia stood slowly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. 20 years ago, I was told to know my place, to accept that some questions shouldn't be asked, especially by someone like me." She met James's glare unflinchingly. "But I made a promise that night, and I've spent 2 decades gathering evidence, watching, waiting." She pulled out a thick file from her briefcase. "This isn't about racism, Mr. Thompson. This is about 12 other cases I've documented. 12 families, 12 victims of your research." The color drained from James's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Sophia turned to the board members. "Check your emails. I've just sent you 20 years worth of evidence. Medical records, witness statements, financial transactions." "Enough!" James slammed his fist on the table. "This ends now. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my family is?" "James," Scarlett's voice was quiet but firm. "Stop. It's over." He whirled on his wife, his composure finally cracking. "You stupid woman. Everything I did for science, for progress." Alexandra understood that. She was willing to sacrifice. She didn't sacrifice anything. Sophia's voice rang out. "You murdered her, just like you were willing to murder Emma for your research." The boardroom doors burst open as 2 FBI agents entered, followed by Dr. Chen. "James Thompson," one agent announced, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of medical fraud, criminal experimentation, and first-degree murder." As the agents approached, James lunged for the door, but Scarlett blocked his path. In the struggle that followed, a paper fell from his jacket, a letter in Alexandra's handwriting, dated the day she died. Sophia picked it up, her hands shaking as she read the first lines. Her eyes widened, and she looked up at Scarlett in shock. "This isn't just a confession," she whispered. "Alexandra wasn't just James's first wife. She was your sister." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap as Scarlett collapsed into her chair, the weight of 2 decades of deception finally crushing down on her shoulders. Sometimes the greatest betrayals aren't just professional. They're written in blood. The media circus outside Mount Sinai reached a fever pitch as reporters clamored for details about the Thompson scandal. Inside Emma's hospital room, Scarlett sat motionless, Alexandra's letter crushed between her fingers. How did I not see it? my own sister, and I married her murderer. Sophia entered quietly, closing the door on the chaos outside. The monitors tracking Emma's vitals beeped steadily, a small mercy in the storm. The antidote is working, Sophia said softly. Her numbers are improving. Scarlett didn't look up. I should have known. Alexandra tried to warn me before she died. But I was so young, so stupid. Her voice cracked. She said, "Watch him, Scar. He's not what he seems." I thought she was delirious. You were 19, Sophia reminded her, checking Emma's 4. James had everyone fooled, even the medical community. But you knew. Scarlett finally met Sophia's eyes. You knew something was wrong all those years ago. That's why you kept investigating, even when they tried to silence you. Sophia's mind flashed back to the countless nights spent poring over medical records, the threatening letters, the slashed tires, the whispered warnings. I knew what it was like to be dismissed, to have your voice silenced. She adjusted Emma's blanket with practiced tenderness. But I never imagined the scope of it until now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Chin entered, his face grave. The press is demanding a statement. The hospital's reputation is in free fall, and the board. He hesitated. They're suggesting we distance ourselves from both of you. Scarlett stood abruptly. Distance yourselves? After you helped cover this up for 20 years? Mrs. Thompson, Chin began, but Sophia cut him off. No, Marcos. No more covering up. She pulled out her phone, showing them a news alert. It's bigger than we thought. 3 more families have come forward. James wasn't working alone. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Chin's face paled. What are you saying? I'm saying that half the hospital board knew about his experiments. They funded them. Sophia's voice was steel. Including your father, Marcus. Chin staggered back, his professional mask cracking. That's impossible. My father would never. April 15th, 2003, Scarlett interrupted, reading from Alexandra's letter. Board meeting minutes. Project Prometheus approved for continued funding. Dr. Chin Sr. to oversee protocols. The letter shook in her hands as she continued. Alexandra documented everything. Names, dates, procedures. She knew they were going to kill her, so she left a trail. Sophia watched Chin's world unravel, remembering her own moments of brutal disillusionment. We have a choice to make, Marcus. Right here, right now. Which side of history do you want to be on? Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the hospital. Emergency lights flashed as security announcements echoed through the corridors. Code Black. Code Black. This is not a drill. Sophia rushed to the window. In the parking lot below, FBI agents were surrounding a group of board members attempting to flee. Among them was Chin's father. They're trying to destroy the evidence, Sophia realized. We need to. Her words were cut off by Emma's sudden gasp. The child's eyes flew open, and she spoke for the first time in days. But what came out of her mouth made everyone freeze. They're in the walls, Emma whispered, her voice eerily calm. Alexandra showed me where they hide everything. Scarlett and Sophia exchanged shocked looks as Emma continued, describing in perfect detail the location of James's secret laboratory. Information she couldn't possibly know. Sometimes, the dead don't just leave letters. They find other ways to speak their truth. 6 months after the Thompson scandal broke, Mount Sinai's rehabilitation wing was quiet except for the steady click of heels against polished floors. Sophia paused before the door marked Ethics Committee, her reflection in the brass nameplate showing shadows under her eyes. 20 years of fighting, and it all comes down to this moment. Inside, Scarlett was already seated at the long table, her once perfectly maintained appearance now bearing the honest marks of motherhood and survival. Emma, fully recovered, sat coloring in the corner, occasionally glancing at the empty chairs around them. The board members' trials start next week, Scarlett said without looking up. James took a plea deal. 30 years, no parole. Sophia nodded, setting down a thick stack of folders. And the families? How are they coping? As well as can be expected. The support group helps. Scarlett finally met Sophia's gaze. Though some still ask why it took a rich white woman's tragedy to finally expose the truth. The weight of that truth hung between them. Sophia thought of all the families who'd been ignored, their concerns dismissed because they were poor or minority or simply not powerful enough to be heard. "Dr. Williams," Emma called out suddenly, holding up her drawing. "Look what I made." The picture showed two women, one black, one white, standing together against a dark background. Between them stood a small figure with wings. "That's you and Mom," Emma explained. "And that's Aunt Alexandra watching over us." Scarlett's breath caught. Since Emma's mysterious connection to Alexandra had been revealed, these moments still rattled them. "The committee's here," Marcus Chin announced from the doorway. His father's conviction had aged him, but there was a new strength in his bearing. "Are you ready?" Sophia straightened her jacket. "As ready as we'll ever be." The room filled with medical professionals from across the country. A new ethics committee formed to prevent another Thompson scandal. Sophia took her place at the podium, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. 20 years ago, I made a promise to a dying woman," she began. "Today, we fulfill that promise by implementing the Alexandra Martinez Protocol." She outlined the new guidelines: enhanced oversight, protection for whistleblowers, mandatory diversity in medical trials, and independent review boards. "But papers and protocols aren't enough," Scarlett added, joining Sophia at the podium. "We need to acknowledge the human cost. Every person who was silenced, every family who was ignored." Her voice broke as she held up Alexandra's letter. "My sister died trying to expose this truth. She believed that one day, someone would listen." The committee members shifted uncomfortably as Scarlett and Sophia presented case after case, name after name, until Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "Mommy, and Alexandra says there's one more." The room fell silent. Sophia's heart raced as Emma walked to the window, pointing at the old hospital wing scheduled for demolition. "She says look behind the third brick from the bottom, in the east wall of room 410. Hours later, as FBI agents carefully extracted a metal box from the specified location, Sophia and Scarlett stood watching. Inside lay a USB drive and a stack of photographs, evidence of experiments dating back to the 1960s. "It's not just about James or the board or even this hospital," Sophia realized. "This is generational." Scarlett picked up one of the photos, her hands trembling. "Sophia, look at the doctor in this picture." The image showed a young black doctor being forced out of the hospital, while in the background, a familiar figure smiled coldly. Sophia's own grandfather. "Sometimes," Sophia whispered, "healing means facing our own demons too." The truth had finally come full circle, proving that justice, like prejudice, could echo through generations. But so could redemption. And in that moment, as the setting sun painted the hospital walls in shades of gold and shadow, both women understood that their journey wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Because sometimes, the greatest changes start not with grand gestures, but with two unlikely allies willing to see beyond the surface of their own prejudices. The end.